Hello everyone, and welcome to Sips and Stories. My name is Elizabeth, and in today's video I will be discussing my middle grade March wrap-up. I had such a fun time following all of the prompts that were set by Books and Jams and Life Between Words and The Curly Reader, and I can't wait to share with you all the books that I read this month. However, in order to justify reading all of these amazing books, I did have to read one classic, and the classic that I did read was Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. So I'm going to start off with the middle grade books because that's why you probably clicked on this video, but stick around if you want to hear my thoughts about Anna Karenina because wow, my mind was blown, and this whole video could be about Anna Karenina, quite frankly. I loved it that much. So grab your favorite beverage and join me as we discuss these terrific reads. The first question that the girls came up with was read a book with a silhouette on its cover. And I thought that was a great question because I never thought about it before, but it's true. A lot of middle grade books do have silhouettes on the cover. It's just one of those things. Maybe because they're smaller, so they can't really get big full-size pictures on a middle grade book. That's my theory. But the one that I read for this question was Escape from Mr. Lemoncello's Library by Chris Grabenstein. And I have been meaning to read this book forever. It's hugely popular. It's a part of a series, and it often gets compared to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory because it is about this really eccentric, crazy, kooky game designer who designs the public library at his hometown. And all the kids have to compete in this contest and solve all of his puzzles and clues to escape from the library. So it is a ton of fun. I do feel that I got a bonus on this silhouette question because silhouettes are actually an important part of the story as well. While the kids are running around the library trying to solve all these clues, the clues themselves come on these little cards that have silhouettes on them. And the kids actually call them silhouette cards. So I'll show you an example if I can find one quickly. Of course I can't. There we go. Here is an example of a football player, number 19. And there's just all these picture puzzles throughout the book. Yes, a perfect one for the silhouette challenge, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next question the girls came up with was read a book that has fairy tale elements or is a fairy tale retelling. And thank you so much for this question because I was meaning to read Snow and Rose by Emily Winfield Martin forever. In fact, I mentioned it in my winter TBR video along with Anna Karenina. And I did really enjoy this story. The best thing about this book, as I mentioned before, are the beautiful illustrations. Emily Winfield Martin's beautiful watercolor illustrations, which are peppered throughout the book. So on every other page there is this beautiful watercolor painting. So that is the reason that I recommend this book. The story itself was so-so. I think a lot of adults like me might find it a little slow, a little boring, a little bit, have to be honest. But I can tell you that my 10-year-old self would have loved this book. So I think it is perfect for kids, for the children that it's intended for, because it is a very easy, low-keyed read. But I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the illustrations again because they're so cute. So here is Ivo with his mushrooms. You see, oh, this is a great one. This is the dinner party when Snow and Rose go and see Ivo's family. This one is a huge winner. I give the illustrations 5 out of 5 stars. I give the story itself 3 out of 5 stars, and then I'm rounding it up to a 4-star read, or to be honest, a 3.5 star read. Loved it, and if she ever comes out with more books with watercolor illustrations, she has a customer in me. The next prompt that they came up with was read a book that features a family or has family elements to it. And that is such an easy prompt for middle grade because so many of our favorite middle grade books feature strong families because most middle grade books are about kids that live at home with their families. And the first one that I read was a little unusual because it's not about a traditional family, and it's called Almost Home by Joan Bauer. And I absolutely love Joan Bauer. She's one of my favorite middle grade authors. Her most famous book is Hope Was Here. It's about a little girl that is a waitress at this diner. It's hilarious. If you have not read it, I highly recommend it. This book, Almost Home, was a close second for me as after Hope Was Here. I thought it was terrific. It's about a young girl named Sugar, and Sugar is going through some very difficult times. Her father is kind of a deadbeat and a gambler, and he's never really around. He always just kind of pops in and out of Sugar's life. And unfortunately, her mom has defaulted on her house, and they are forced to move and leave the house. They were evicted, and they go and crash on people's couches. Then they do a stint in a homeless shelter. And eventually the mom kind of has this nervous breakdown, and Sugar has to go into foster care. So even though it's about a very serious topic, it's really well done. Joan Bauer really has a terrific sense of humor. This is very light, it's very heartwarming. And as you can see by that dog on the cover, there is an incredible dog in this book named Shush. And just seeing how Sugar tries to keep Shush at all the places that she visits. So whether it's a friend's house or a homeless shelter, or whether she's sent into foster care, she is very fierce about keeping Shush. So it's a lot of fun, and my favorite part about this book is that Sugar doesn't get a perfect ending. She gets a happy ending, but not a perfect ending, and I think that's really true to how life is, and it teaches kids that you can't control your situations in your life, but you can control your attitude. So I love this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read for the family prompt was The Wednesday Wars by Gary D. Schmidt. And I have to tell you that this was one of my favorites of the month. This is the one that I recommend the most for adult readers. In fact, I recommend this for any adults out there that are snobby about middle grade and think, you know what, I'm not reading any middle grade. I would hand them this book and say, read this. Tell me this isn't a great story. Tell me that this isn't fantastic writing and has amazing characters. Like, tell me that this is not as good as all the adult fiction out there today, because it's fantastic. It's about a little boy named Holling. He's in, I think, 7th grade in middle school. And it starts out, it's set in the 60s in Long Island during the Vietnam War. A lot of important historical things are going on. A lot of the teachers at the school, including Mrs. Baker, his English teacher, have family that are soldiers in the Vietnam War. And his sister is one of my favorite characters, Heather. She's very hippie, she's a flower child, and she is totally against the war, and she's out there protesting. She's in love with the Beatles and Robert Kennedy, and then she has like this nervous breakdown when Martin Luther King dies. Those sections are really, really good. And her relationship with Holling is wonderful, so I don't want to spoil the ending or anything, but there's some really terrific scenes with Heather and Holling. Their family is not the greatest family, so that's why I'm including this one in this prompt as well, is the father is a complete jerk in this book. And it's really rare to read children's books where the adults are kind of like real adults. They're just mean and they have all these expectations. However, the main part of this story is about Holling's relationship with his teacher, Mrs. Baker. And Mrs. Baker, his English teacher, she is really, really tough on him. So on Wednesdays, everyone else in his class, they either go to church and go to Bible study, or they go to synagogue and go to Hebrew school. So because Holling is Protestant, he just stays at the school. And his teacher, Mrs. Baker, says, look, if you're gonna be with me every Wednesday afternoon, we're not gonna waste that time. We are gonna read all of Shakespeare's plays together. So they do. They read Romeo and Juliet one month, and then they read Hamlet and The Tempest and a good chunk of Shakespeare's plays. And the only thing that was unbelievable about this book was that Holling has a real grasp on Shakespeare, more than I ever did as an English major. So I think that's like a little unrealistic that a 7th grader would have this college level analysis of Shakespeare, but it's terrific. Great book, great writing, and this one is almost a 5-star read for me, not quite. I would say a definite 4.5 stars for me. And the last book that I read in the family category, a lot of these books I just wanted to read and they fit into the family category, was Front Desk by Kelly Yang. And I don't really need to say too much about this book because I'm sure many of you are aware of it. I see it practically in every bookstore I visit in the children's department. And Anne Bogle on What Should I Read Next, the podcast, she talks about this book all the time, so I knew I had to read it. Also, Kelly Yang is a really interesting person. She herself is a Chinese immigrant. She graduated from Harvard when she was like 20, super young, and she started the Kelly Yang Project, where she teaches writing courses for children, and especially kids in Hong Kong, which I find fascinating. So this book was really good to read this month during just a lot of the unrest that was happening in the Asian community. So I think a lot of those stories were so disturbing. So reading this book was really helpful for me. And I think people like Kelly Yang can really bridge the gap because she is so smart and such a good humanitarian at the same time. So what is this book about? This book is about a little girl named May, who is a Chinese immigrant with her family, and they end up running this hotel in Los Angeles, or this motel, I should say. So like one of those dive motels that are near Disneyland. And her parents take care of the hotel, they do the laundry, her dad does all the maintenance, and the owner of the motel, Mr. Yao, is just this really mean character and their arch nemesis. And he always tells the family when they complain, like, what are you gonna do? What other job are you gonna get here in America? Like, make it work. So the little girl, May, she runs the front desk because her parents are busy all the time, like cleaning the rooms, and she interacts with all the customers. It's so fun. She has just this really great spunky attitude. There's a little boy, Jason, in this book who has a crush on her, and she puts Jason in his place. So I loved this book. And the ending was such a good ending. I think one of my favorite endings of any middle grade book that I've read recently. It was just one of those endings you just want to start clapping at the end. Loved it. And I know this has a sequel as well, 3 Keys, I believe. I am looking forward to reading the second book because I just love Kelly Yang. She is the real deal. The next book that I read was for the birthday prompt, or what decade were you born in prompt. I was born in the 80s, and if you're trying to find a middle grade book that was written in the 80s that was not by Roald Dahl or Beverly Cleary or Judy Blume, you're gonna have a really difficult time. So I went back through my TBR and I found Castle in the Attic by Elizabeth Winthrop. And this was such a good book, such a charming, sweet, low-keyed little story. So if you just like little easy stories like that, I highly recommend this one. It's a gem. It is about a little boy named William, and William's housekeeper, Mrs. Phillips, has decided to move back to England, and William is devastated because Mrs. Phillips has practically raised him. His parents are very professional people, so his mom's a doctor, his dad's an architect, and they don't have a ton of time for William, so he's been raised by Mrs. Phillips. And before she leaves, she gives him this big castle, this almost like lifelike castle, this miniature castle, like a dollhouse. And he starts playing with it, and one of the figures comes to life, this knight named Sir Simon. And so William goes on all of these adventures with Sir Simon, and if he goes back into the Middle Ages, it's a ton of fun. And the main message of this book is that part of loving people is learning to let them go. It's just a beautiful story, and there are a lot of instances of gymnastics in this story. So it is very 80s because William is really into gymnastics. He goes to gymnastics practice all the time. And then there's this like climactic scene where he defeats the villain with gymnastics routines. It's a ton of fun, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read for middle grade March was for the Journey Adventure prompt, and that was The Detective's Assistant by Kate Hannigan. And this one, to be honest, was my favorite book of the entire middle grade March. I loved it. And the interesting thing about this book is I did not read a review of it. I didn't see it on BookTube. I just saw it at the bookstore and it sounded good to me. It is about a real life lady detective named Kate Warren, and Kate Warren was the first female detective here in the United States, and she worked for Mr. Pinkerton in Chicago, Pinkerton's detective agency, during the Civil War. And she actually did protect people like Abraham Lincoln when Abraham Lincoln was traveling by train. So this is a real life person that we're talking about. But in the book, Kate Hannigan has created this fictional niece called Nell, and Nell is an orphan, and she is sent to live with her Aunt Kate, and she does not want to go to an orphanage, so she tries to help Aunt Kate with all of her detective work, and it's so much fun. I absolutely loved this story. And it's hilarious because they go all over the country, to Washington, D.C., to Philadelphia, to Chicago, and they go on all these really fun adventures to solve these cases. So if you like detective stories, if you like historical fiction, if you like strong female characters, you will love this book as much as I did. One of my favorite parts about it was Kate Hannigan's writing. So just her Nell's spunkiness and all her like really funny turns of phrase are hilarious. I think this would make a really good made-for-TV movie. I think Disney Plus should just buy the rights to this book right now and turn it into a movie because it would be so adorable, and I can just picture the casting for all these characters perfectly in my head. So I loved it so much, and it was, really, to be honest with you, this was my favorite book that I read this month in the middle grade genre. I also read one more book this month, as I mentioned before, and that was Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. So I kind of felt guilty about reading all of these middle grade books, and I felt I still had to read something classic, highbrow, to justify reading all the middle grade. So I chose one of the hardest books in ever, but oh my gosh, I did not expect to love this story as much as I did. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It's one of those books that just came to me at the perfect time in life. It is epic. It's so fantastic. And I don't know about you guys, but I am a person that just loves discussing religion and politics and spirituality and, you know, what it means to be a human, what it means to be alive, what we're supposed to be doing with our lives. And this book just answers those questions perfectly. So it's really interesting. I've been reading a lot of Eckhart Tolle lately, a lot of Thich Nhat Hanh lately, and some of the theories that they have been talking about presence and mindfulness and the ego. I just saw that just really displayed throughout Anna Karenina perfectly. It's such a beautiful, beautiful story, and it's mainly about 2 characters, but it's about a lot of characters. But our 2 main characters are Anna Karenina and Levin, and they're both really amazing characters. In fact, there's not one character in this book that I did not like. Like even some of the villains, like Vronsky, you like Vronsky because Leo Tolstoy puts you in Vronsky's head. So you're not judging him because you know what he's thinking throughout the book. So many fantastic characters. So I really don't want to talk too much about the plot because I don't want to ruin it for anyone that hasn't read it. It's such a good book, and it's just, yes, I think we all know it's about an affair, but it's beyond that. And the reason I don't think I've ever gotten a straight answer from this book is because you have to experience this book. It's not one that you can just read the plot and think you know what it's about. You've got to go and read it. And even though it's 800 pages long, every section is very easy. So he divides it into like these really short 2-page sections, so it's really easy to get through. I still took about like 3-4 weeks to read this. Just read about 30 pages a day with my morning cup of coffee, and I really liked taking it at a slow pace because while I was reading all these middle grade books, I was also just thinking a lot about Anna Karenina, like what's gonna happen to her? What's gonna happen to Vronsky? What's gonna happen to Levin? Is he gonna get together with Kitty? What's gonna happen? So it was really epic. So if you like really epic books, you're gonna get that. But there's a lot of discussion of religion and politics in this book, and the politics then reflect the politics now, and it's so interesting. It's like he knew that the Russian Revolution was gonna happen. So I'm sure many people have discussed that in depth, but you can feel it. I'm like, if society was really like this in Russia at that time, well then it's just no wonder what happened. I think that American society in particular, we're at that point that Russian society was at in this book, and we have to make important decisions, otherwise we're gonna have another revolution. It's really, really good. If you're like me and you love talking about religion, spirituality, politics, you'll love this book. It's so, so good. And of course I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Alrighty everyone, thank you for joining me for my March middle grade and Anna Karenina wrap up.